I am Dr. Kelli Morgan. I'm a critical race cultural historian. So my work really champions African American art.
Hey everybody, Dr. Morgan back to talk to you today a little bit about the Chicago Renaissance. When we talk historically about moments in African American art history, we talk a lot about, or you hear a lot about, the Harlem Renaissance, right? You hear a lot about the Black Arts Movement. But I don't think we hear enough, about the Chicago Renaissance. The moment where Black artists and writers like Margaret Burroughs, Richard Wright, Gwendolyn Brooks, Elizabeth Catlett, L.D.R. Cortor, Archibald Motley, Margaret Walker, and the list is, way longer than I can get into in such a short video. But artists who came together, through the tenets of social realism, through the cultural fervor of the South Side of Chicago, and the socio-political moment in 1930s, late 30s, 40s, 50s Chicago, to produce a wealth, right, of just poetry and essays and painting and sculpture, creating spaces, right, for Black children and Black adolescents to hone that next generation, to hone their skills, right, in arts and literature, and dance. Catherine Dunham was a huge presence, in Chicago at this time. And we don't talk enough about, how, right, that Renaissance existed, one, and two, how integral, right, those artists were, as a link, right, as the cultural production, or like the current of cultural production continued, from the Harlem Renaissance to the Black Arts Movement, that the Chicago artists were absolutely critical, right, to how that Black cultural production flowed, nationally. So here in this video, I give you or offer a little bit of history and a little bit of analysis of the Chicago artists. For the Chicago artists, the images and realities of the Black experience, or Black experiences, were shown through the eyes of the Black working class. These artists were greatly influenced by Marxism, and the role of the Black worker in American society was very important to their work. So during the 1920s, Chicago was quickly becoming a Black metropolis. Southern African Americans were migrating north to take advantage of employment opportunities in Chicago's industrial factories. By the 1930s, Chicago had a Black population of well over 200,000, and a discernible class structure was emerging on Chicago's South Side, making the South Side a Black city within a city. So there were Black businesses, Black banks, Black insurance companies, pharmacies, you name it. And African Americans of all different social classes were living together. The South Side then became more popularly known as Bronzeville. The art and culture that emerged from Black Chicagoans still exists today. Publications like Ebony and Jet were started by John Johnson in Chicago, and the city's jazz and blues culture was solidified by artists like Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday. But Black Chicago visual artists and writers felt that African American art should have its own space while utilizing the popular aesthetics of the time. They were interested in creating Black art for and by Black people. Now, we know this concept is central to the Black Arts Movement, but it really grew out of the Black Chicago artists. In visual art in particularly, this idea of a Black aesthetic really grew out of Afro-Cobra, which was also a Chicago arts group that developed in the decades following the artists that I'm discussing today. But Chicago artists were creating, right, within a space where they were attempting to communicate universal ideas through Black experiences. But they were using social realism to illuminate the socio-political conditions of the Black working class as a means to critique the power structures behind these conditions, right? As well as to empower Black people within these conditions to use their positions as workers and their positions as such a large working class to push back, right, against the power structures that were often oppressive and discriminating against them. For instance, in this piece, artist Charles White celebrates the Black working class while implicitly criticizing the racial hierarchy of power and privilege. In this drawing, White depicts the strength of the working Black man exhibited by the sheer size of the figure. His body occupies most of the canvas, and the large arms are in the center of the foreground. This signifies the sheer strength it took for Black men to do the most menial and dangerous jobs in Chicago's factories and foundries, but also the will, right, that it took to be treated and addressed as boys or dangerous threats to nearly all white people they came in contact with. And I want you to keep in mind that many of these men, working on these lines, right, and working in these menial, pretty dangerous factory jobs, were bachelor degreed and master degreed. Many people, who came up to the northern urban cities, from the South during the Great Migration were HBCU graduates, right? But due to the fact that, racism was also an issue, particularly in hiring practices, in the urban North, they couldn't get the jobs, that they very much so qualified for, that they often were overqualified than the white person doing the hiring. They couldn't get those jobs. So this is something that, again, Black people knew about themselves, about their, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, within our own communities, that white folks really did know too, right? But just chose to ignore. And so an artist like Charles White, and some of the other artists I'll talk about in a minute, are very adamant about illustrating that, through using social realist aesthetics, to illustrate literally just the strength and the power and the grandeur, of Black, not just Black physical labor, but also Black intellectual acumen. To use a literary example, we see this most keenly in Margaret Walker's poem, For My People. Published in 1941, she references Black historical moments of oral customs and diligent work ethic to exalt the determination of a people who, quote, lended their strength to the years by cooking, plowing, and singing their dirges and their ditties, their blues and their jubilees, end quote. For 1940s Chicago, and I think 1940s America in a broader sense, Walker suggests that Blacks living in Chicago at the time look back at how their parents and grandparents survived their oppression, specifically through oral traditions like the spirituals and the blues, managed grueling agrarian and housework through cultural practices like work songs. She also uses her knowledge of past Black customs to encourage her contemporaries to create their own songs, to fashion a better way from confusion and misunderstanding. In 1992, she coupled with her dear friend Elizabeth Catlett to create a limited edition club edition, of For My People that was illustrated by lithographs of Catlett's. So the images that you see here are Catlett's illustrations, right, to go along with the poem. And together they suggest that the remembrance of a Black past is crucial for new Black identities. But in order for the community to grow, a new world must be born. Here, Catlett and Walker are suggesting that African Americans create their own images from within to begin to see themselves through their own eyes instead of the eyes of an oppressive society.